My name is Matthew Vishaw from BibleProtector.com. What is going on with Wikisource, the repository of information and documentation for Wikipedia? They're changing the King James Bible. You see, they used to have an Oxford edition on there representing the King James Version. Now, the Oxford edition, of course, wasn't quite right. It has some variations between the Oxford and the Cambridge edition. They should have had the Cambridge edition. The Cambridge edition, in Joshua 19 verse 2, if you look in that verse, it'll read Beersheba or Sheba. Now, in the Oxford, which was on Wikipedia, in the Wikisource, it had Beersheba and Sheba, which is not uncommon, but it isn't actually correct. Well, what's happening now is they've turned from that and said, we're wanting to use the 1769 Oxford edition as edited by Benjamin Blayney. Now, Dr. Blayney actually did two different editions in 1769. He did a folio and then he did a smaller sized one. But do you know that every year afterwards has not exactly followed what he did then? Now, in Joshua 19 verse 2, he had Beersheba, Sheba, like that. No word or and in between those two names. Now, that's very interesting because that's not what editions, for example, from the 20th century had. And that's showing that, in fact, what Dr. Blayney did at that time, whilst he did, good work in standardizing and everything, did not finish or come up with a precisely correct printing of the King James Bible. In fact, there were some printing errors there from 1769. Well, another really important point to make here is that no one in their normal Sunday morning church would use this kind of edition, the 1769, because the only known copies of it really are locked away in special collections in libraries somewhere. So it's a very rare thing to have a 1769 folio. And here we have on Wikipedia where they're using the first half of the 1769 and they can't even find the second half because they're using the 1772 edition to fill out some differences in the last part of the Bible. Now, what we're really getting at here is they're reverting back to previous things, like printing errors from 1769, for example, or, spelling the words in a non-standardized way. They're reverting back to that rather than what has been the accepted norm, and more importantly, they're not accepting that the pure Cambridge edition actually is the standard and accepted edition of the King James Version. And that's the stand we have to take, and that's what we should see and should desire, is to have a precisely accepted standard edition, not go back to 1769, but to go to what has been standing now for many years, coming out of the Cambridge University Press, which is the pure Cambridge edition, something which is correct and right and reliable. So it's perplexing to say, why would people revert back to something with all its impurities, so to speak, in there, with mistakes like accidentally repeating words in a verse. The printers made mistakes in those days, a lot of them, and so why would we go back to that? No, we need to go to a standard edition, standard beyond the work of 1769, but standard that has been accepted already now for many decades without any new changes. Because making any change today, whether it is like this one, going back to some, reverting back to something that was at some one time used, it's an incorrect understanding of the Bible printing history. Because anyone who's really studied in this area knows that you can't go back and say, the 1769 is the standard edition, simply because, like this example at Joshua 19 verse 2 shows, it didn't get it right. So with that in mind, I want you to search out and use the pure Cambridge edition of the King James Bible, and let's see that we are actually sticking with what is correct, what has the weight of tradition behind it, and not some upstart new move to go back to a 1769 when that hasn't been used and already all the normal editions were superseding it. Let's go forward with what's right, and let's honour that 1769. It's certainly a good thing to know what was there, And it did improve the years before it. All the work, yes, it did a lot of good, but it wasn't quite right, and in a very few places there needed to be some changes. And that's why we have to stick with the pure Cambridge edition of the King James Bible.